Hi everyone, karibuni sana for another episode of ESAC Knowledge Sharing Series. We'll give guys a few minutes to log in and then we'll proceed. All right. Karibuni sana. I see you guys are logging in. Thank you so much. For those who are joining us for the first time, this is a series that we have every month. And the intention is to keep having it as the sector continues to grow and evolve. Karibuni sana. I see some new faces and some new names logging in. It's good to see you. All right. This is the ESAC knowledge sharing series. This is our fourth episode of this series that we started. The idea is to try and tackle misinformation that we've seen in the sector, as well as explain key issues that are going on in the sector. Today's episode is one that is special. I know I said that last time. The other one was also special. Even this one is special, like the next one. But we have a very special panel with us today, and we'll be looking at the future of the future of our sector and what we aspire to see going forward. This will be a very interesting conversation. I see we have we've tried to balance the panel as is, and speaking from a point of a communications expert, I would say there are also some things I would note that we've done so far in the sector that I would say were not really emphasized before, and it's something to applaud. Seeing we've seen measures or guys institutions taking effort, making deliberate efforts in their communication departments to ensure that there is proper or the communication is clear. Something that was not there, we'd not seen a lot before. And it's something that is recommendable, and that this cuts across private sector as well as government. So, as the experts or these technical guys take on to handle the technical bit of this conversation, I think it's good to also note that even the software side, we are also doing something, and I think we are on the right path to or as far as communication and information sharing goes in the sector. That said, I will not speak much. I want to hand it over to our moderator for today. He is none other than Osawa himself, Bernard, and then we'll take it from there. Karibu sana, Bernard.
Thank you, Penina, and thank you to all the participants who've logged in. Thank you to the panel, and welcome to this interesting conversation that we are about to have, and hopefully will be the beginning of further conversations. And the panel tonight, I have Dr. Engineer Joseph Ukich from EPRA. I have Adrian Mwai, and I have George Aluru and myself. I'll probably just give them a minute each to introduce themselves so that you know what they are made of and what we're about to be engaged in. Daktari?
Thank you so much, Bernard. As I've introduced, I'm Dr. Engineer Joseph Okech. Currently, I'm the Director in charge of Electricity and Renewable Energy at the Energy and Petroleum Regulatory Authority. I've been in this sector for now 31 years. I started my work as a young engineer in Kenya Power and Lighting. And that time, Kenya Power and Lighting was doing everything from generation, transmission, distribution, and supply. Then I went to rural electrification, and currently now I'm at EPRA. I'm very happy to be part of the discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you, Daktari. Adrian? Adrian, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Good evening, everyone. My name is Adrian Mwai. I am a passionate renewable energy professional. Currently, I am working for Hewani Energy. Hewani Energy is a renewable energy developer, primarily developing wind energy projects, and is owned by Seriti Green, that is a South African company, and Eurus Energy of Japan. I am really excited and honored to be part of this debate and this conversation, and looking forward to good deliberations. Thank you.
George?
Good evening, everyone. My name is George Aluru. I'm the CEO of the Electricity Sector Association of Kenya. I've also been around in the sector, I think now for about 15 years, working mostly on the IPP side of the electricity sector. And now working with the Electricity Sector Association of Kenya, we basically do advocacy for the private sector investing in electricity. And also very happy to be here. I think the topic for today's session is very interesting. Thank you, Bernard.
Okay, and just to cement my bragging rights, in terms of the sector, I've been around for about 25 years, initially doing small solar systems. And then I became one of the largest consumers of electricity, working for Lafarge in East Africa. And then I was a regulator for a short time. And now I'm an IPP, or power project developer, renewable energy. So I can authoritatively run this session. Now, so that we get into the conversation, I'd like us to get just some highlights of where we are so that we can know where we are coming from and where we are going. We need to have some bearing. So the sector has had mixed performance. Our installed capacity currently stands at 3,078 megawatts. We've experienced, the highest peak we've experienced is about 2,239. Our access rate is more than 77%. How that translates to connectivity and people using power is debatable, and that might be subject of the conversation today. Our tariffs are mixed up. As the June 2024 tariffs, the highest was our domestic tariff at 29 shillings per kilowatt hour from the records that I have. And the lowest was an industrial tariff of 18 shillings. So again, it's debatable how high or how low that is, but we'll talk about that. And of course, where we stand now, there's a lot of uncertainty in the development, especially of new generation transmission and distribution capacities. So my panelists will help me discuss that. For those who are new to the sector and listening in and hopefully contribute, the sector generally comprises three parts: generation, which is the IPPs and KenGen. There's transmission, which is KETRACO. There's distribution and retail, which is KPLC and REREC. There are other players such as GDC and NewPair, who are upstream of the generation stream. So they do the development before people come in. C&I, commercial and industrial, is now considered mainstream, and the regulator will tell us that, but it has emerged as a large component of generation, and is growing rapidly for various reasons that we'll also discuss today. The sector regulation is EPRA, and we are honored to have Dr. Engineer Okech here to join in the conversation. They are responsible for mainly planning. And then we have the ministry, which is responsible for policy, planning as well, and governance. And we will discuss some governance issues in the sector that impact across the power value chain. Typically, we've been using the Least Cost Power Development Plan, the LCPDP, to plan the sector, which has been under EPRA, but now it's been moved to KPLC, following recommendations from the various task forces that have led to the memoranda or to the moratoria that we've had. So for the past 5 years, there's been a level of uncertainty. It's important to know that. And that is certainly going to expose the country to some looming shortages. Important to know. We've had some great milestones as a country, so that when we look at where we are going to, we understand where we are coming from. We've had many firsts. The first unbundling of the power sector, I think in Africa, Kenya did that very well. We've had the first IPP market, which has been fairly successful. We've had the highest access rate in terms of power. But of course, we can certainly do better. And we will hear that from the panel. We've resolved to go 100% clean energy. Is it by 2030? Again, that is subject to discussion. And we are looking at 100% connectivity by 2030 as well. So we have a plan, or we have a target and aim, but are we really getting there? So policy adjustments are happening. Market restructuring is proposed. We hope that this will deliver changes to the market. And of course, the energy policy is being reviewed to drive us towards that. So for tonight, we are going to focus mainly on 4 key areas. Coverage or access, which currently stands at 77% plus. We are going to talk about quality of supply, cost of electricity, tariffs. We are also going to look at the structure of the sector, the efficiency of the sector, competence issue. Is the structure of the sector fit for purpose, especially given that C&I has been coming rapidly. We are talking about net metering and other issues. And of course, we're going to talk about sector planning and engagement with sector stakeholders, especially IPPs and governance issues. So to move to the conversation, I'll be asking each of our panelists to give their opinions and thoughts about how we need to move. And since Kenya prides itself in playing in the global stage, this conversation will give us expert opinions from the people we have and the people in the call or the people in the meeting to give us some ideas. How do we move this sector forward? Where do we go from here to be truly world-class as we claim to be? So I think I'll start with Adrian. In terms of, based on the 4 areas that we have, I've highlighted, are we as a sector in a good or a bad place? Have we delivered what we are supposed to deliver with respect to the 4 key areas plus more?
Thank you, Bernard, for the great overview that you've given us, and you've really set the tone and the scene very well. From our view, as an IPP, and also my view as a Kenyan citizen, an active Kenyan citizen, I would say that Kenya, first of all, historically has done very well in setting the foundation, especially for the energy sector, to manage to bring in the private sector, private involvement. The steps that were taken in unbundling and encouraging public-private partnership, I think has been very key to drive us to this point. I'm also very proud that Kenya has really taken a stand and decided to go full force on this green energy. So the green energy that we are producing and being over 90% green grid really gives us a lot of impetus and opportunity to drive forward. I think the state of the sector where we are, we have come from far. We have learned quite a bit of lessons. And I think, in my view, it looks like we're in a point where we need now to kind of change the direction a bit and move the sector forward, as has been done in other markets. There are opportunities that we have set forth for ourselves in the market by the grid being green. We do have the opportunity to do a lot of the green industrial manufacturing and get a bit of premium for that. And this will spur the economy, and it will also spur in a lot of investment. Further to that, also as we continue to improve our grid and transmission infrastructure, we're able to bring in the cheaper renewable that are coming on, and then continue lowering the average cost of power that we've had. So I think in generally, we've come a long way, but we do also have a long way to go. And I think we are at that transition point where if we collaborate between ourselves, the sector, the government, and the consumers, and work together, we should be able to take this electricity industry forward. Thank you, Bernard.
Daktari, you're the regulator, but you have visibility of the entire value chain and the country as we go. So are we, as a sector, in a good place or bad place? And have we delivered? And you being the referee, I think, is best placed to give us some markings, or, how are we performing?
Thank you so much, Bernard, and thank you, our viewers and our listeners. I think the way I said, I'm delighted to be here today to share with you the knowledge and also the information so that you don't have misinformation in the sector. And thank you, Bernard, for the nice overview, and Adrian for your contribution so far. I think as a sector in Kenya, electricity sector, we have had a very good run. The way Bernard said, we started by unbundling in the late 1990s, and that was due to the growth we were experiencing then. And we could not now bring all the new generation from only government and our development partner funded projects. So we wanted to tap into the private sector. And currently, as we talk, KenGen, which is the public generator in Kenya, is only giving us 60% of our energy. The rest, 40%, is being given by the IPPs, which to me is a very good way to go. When I talk also about the power adequacy, that means do we have enough power in the country? I think we have been doing what's called the least cost power development plan. And this is a plan where we project the load growth in the country. And then we also look at candidate projects which can come at a point of time to meet that load growth. And our planning has been very well. And I must say that we have been always meeting, I think since the load sheddings we had in the late 90s, we have not had any serious load shedding currently. And Bernard said that there are some areas we may be as a regulator, because we look at the sector holistically, where we still need improvement. One of the greatest improvements we have been working on is to expand our transmission network in the country. And as you are aware, and maybe those who aren't aware should now know, we just commissioned a few years back the highest voltage line, HVDC, 500 kilovolt HVDC line, connecting us with our neighbor to the north, that is Ethiopia. We have also enriched our internal networks by taking them to higher voltages. Like now, the line between Nairobi now and Mombasa is been done for 400 kV. And then there's also the line between Olkaria, the geothermal field, to Nairobi is already operating at 400 kV. The line now joining with the Uganda, we have done it for 400 kV, but now we still operate it at 220 kV. We are just now, as we talk, we are commissioning our line, joining us to our neighbor to the to the south, Tanzania. That line is designed for 400 kV, but will operate at 220. This will have been done just in the last 2 years or 3 years, because that was our weakest link. After bringing the IPPs, Then we found that our evacuation of the generation was not good enough. And also our interconnectivity to our neighboring countries, which we maybe will talk about later, because we are planning to go to the Eastern African power pool, and we needed this interconnection. One thing also we must pride ourselves as Kenyans is that we are the 6th in the world in geothermal production. And that's something we should clap for ourselves as Kenyans. I think, and very soon we may now go up, because I think when I look at how we are doing, we are some very few countries we can overtake very soon. And that has been very good for us to bring it baseload, and also what Adrian talked about of us going green. Actually, currently, as we talk, from the dispatch, we only use the thermal power plant just for the peak. And our peak occurs between 7 in the evening, like now, almost now, until around 10 o'clock. That's when you use the thermal power plants. So thermal power plant generation in this country, which is not green, always don't go beyond 10%. So our grid is over 90% green. So those are some of the things. Bernard has talked about connectivity. I think connectivity is where we have done well compared with our neighboring countries. Achieving that 77% electrification rate is not an easy thing. How did we do it? We use a lot of strategies. The first strategy was last mile connectivity, where we're identifying where the transformers were existing. Some of those transformers were done by Rural Electrification Authority, currently RAREC. That initially was Rural Electrification Authority, now this is Rural and Renewable Energy Corporation. So when they are put transformers, they used to target public institutions like schools, public hostels. So some of the customers who are there were not connected. So that last mile connectivity identified those customers, and that helped us to improve our electrification rate. The next one was mini grids. Initially, mini grids in Kenya are being developed by only government and our development partner funding. That was going through Rural Electrification Authority, now REREC. And then those mini grids are being developed, then they're being handed over to Kenya Power Lighting to operate. But we also saw it twice as a sector players, like most of the regulator, to bring in the private sector. Currently, most of the mini grids being developed, they are green mini grids. They are mostly solar-based with storage. And we identified 14 counties. I think those people are aware about a project called COSAP in Kenya, where we are now trying to develop those mini grids in the 14 counties. We have done so many of those mini grids, and that's what brought us to where we are. So Bernard, to me, I feel, and our viewers and listeners, I think we are doing very well. There may be a few handicaps, like I can mention reliability of power, the number of blackouts we have had as a country compared to the international standard, and maybe we feel that we are not yet there, and even the quality of supply and service. But as a regulator, maybe I'll come later on and tell you what you are doing towards to address this, so that we also move towards the best practices and compare ourselves with the best performing countries. Thank you for now.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Ari. George, you want to chip in with where we are at, in your opinion, or in the sector's opinion?
Yes, I think both Adrian, yourself, and Dr. Ari have really covered it well. So I'll just comment from the point of view of the private sector. I think we have done well as a country first to attract private sector, especially in generation. So we had I think the first plants coming in, the thermal plants were acquired through some tendering process. Then after that, we then went into feed-in tariff, which has brought in a lot of the more renewable power plants. And now, of course, we are changing. So there has been a huge attraction of private investment into the country, especially in wind, solar, and legacy thermal plants. I would say. So that is, I think, for me is a positive thing. I think you did mention, Bernard, Kenya was the first, more or less the first country in sub-Saharan Africa doing independent power producers, even earlier than South Africa itself. So that is something that I think we must be proud of. Again, connectivity, I won't repeat that. Connectivity, I think we are doing good. And also now we are starting to see also private investments in transmission. So there's also an attempt now to onboard more private players within the transmission space to kind of supplement the investment that the government is doing through KETRACO. That is really positive. I think from the private sector, the urge is always that they would want opportunities to invest in a kind of a clear process, a process that is repeatable, that is competitive, and in the end, of course, that also ideally would lead to a lowering of cost, which I think now is where I think we get battered or bashed a lot as a sector, especially by the public around the cost of power. I think there's a lot of effort that we need to do to find the best way to progressively reduce that cost of power. I think you've also talked about issues around quality of supply, blackouts, etc. I think there's work to be done there also. And then also we have a progressive, I would say, Energy Act. The 2019 Energy Act is progressive. It sees a lot of unbundling, further unbundling, maybe like even into the retail side of the sector. I think this would then help us to improve the quality of supply, attract more investments, and retain more investments, and then also just reduce the cost. But we have to then, in my view, it has to be some sort of an intentional effort to see which is the best approach. We can see what other countries have done and maybe tailor make something that works for Kenya in terms of moving us forward. I will keep my comments there, and maybe I'll say further as we proceed in the next questions.
Okay, so thank you, gentlemen.
You went on mute, Bande. You're on mute.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I think the next thing I want to do is to get the panelists to crystallize some of the issues so that we can move to the listeners and get some feedback from them. So I've heard you say several things, but in 3 or 4 bullet points, I just like to understand from each of you in terms of challenges. What have been the challenges? What have we done right? And what have we done wrong? And what can we do better? I mean, just crystallize that so that we can get reactions from our listeners or our viewers on this session so that we can take the discussion further. Who will go first? Dr.
Maybe I can start. I can go first.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Bernard, and thank you, my fellow panelists, and thank you, our listeners and viewers. I think the challenges which we have in the country, one of them I can mention is when we started with feed-in tariffs, we didn't attract the investors so much at the initial, because I think maybe the investment climate was not good for the investors. And some of these technologies were maturing so that I think people are not really adapted them so much. But by the time they came into this country, I think I must confess that first of all, one of our first power plant, we came under feed-in tariffs. Those tariffs were a bit high, but now we have revised them downwards because the technology is maturing, and then the tariffs, the per unit cost of production of electricity from those tariffs are coming down. So I think the listeners should not blame us for those high tariffs. I think some people have always been talking about the high tariffs from maybe some IPPs, and the high tariff maybe from the first power plants, which we brought in when our risk rating as a country was very high. And that time, actually, even to be honest, we had not built capacity even to negotiate those PPAs. And this thing I'm saying, this I'm saying very candidly. Currently, as we talk, I can assure you, we have enough capacity to negotiate PPAs in the best way possible to get so that we get value for money for our projects and also for the investments and also for our consumers. About the tariffs, I think tariffs, people have felt, I'm also a consumer, and all the consumers in the country, be they industrial or domestic, are complaining about high tariffs. But this because our sector is growing. Most of our investments are new, they are not being paid off. I think George mentioned a very good term he used about legacy. power plants. Most of the countries have got legacy power plants which have been paid for, the investment has been paid for. But you check at our grid is currently developing, so most of the investment are still being paid for. So that's where the tariffs are. But we have done well. I also want to mention we have got the biggest wind power plant, Lake Turkana Wind, south of Sahara. And it is also one of the best with the highest load factor, actually. I've never seen a wind power plant doing 60% load factor. So I think some of these achievements are good, but the challenges are also still there. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Adrian.
Thank you, Bernard, and thank you, Dr. for that. Yeah, I think we do have challenges, and I think whereas we have made many gains, some of the challenges that we would need to work together with all stakeholders are issues like kind of having a defined pipeline, and so that, for example, for the investors and for the investment projects, working together with the sector and to kind of have a pipeline that is defined will help even in the investment and will help in the timing of investments. These projects are long-term projects. They are challenging. We have an internal joke that they last longer than most marriages. So these are very long-term projects. But having kind of a defined pipeline also would help us and just help the investment climate. And I think the other thing that we need to do, and thanks to ESAC, we have started doing this stakeholder engagements that we are doing. I think between the IPPs, not just those who are generating, maybe more frequent engagement we can have between the IPPs and even the consumers and the government, just to share ideas and to be more innovative. And this would also come down to the issues of even the policies that have been discussed. I think the regulator is doing really well in putting out these policies, and there's public participation. But I do feel that we could do more of engagement just for us to get better ideas and to work together as a team. On the tariff, I just agree on the tariff. With the advancements in material science and in advancement in technology, the tariffs will always come lower. And I think the questions we should ask ourselves is that, do we create the demand first and do the generation, or where's the balance? So I think one of the critical discussions we can have between the sectors, even as we look to increase manufacturing and bring other investors from the manufacturing side and increase demand, is that what's the balance between having the pipeline of generation versus waiting for the demand to ramp up, and how do we balance and ensure that we attract all investors? Thank you for that.
Adrian, George, you have something to chip in?
Yeah, so I'll try to be just a bit more concise. I think one of the biggest challenges, I think, from the private sector point of view, has been the pace at which we make decisions and basically give a signal and direction about where the market is going. We did well with feed-in tariff to bring in investors, but then I think as we are aware, the investors then came in, and yes, some got built, but a lot of them didn't get built, and we have now been signaling around going into auctions. So I think the challenge has always been for the investor is when will this happen? When will we make implement some of the changes that we're talking of? Considering that these investors are spending money, they have staff, they have projects they're developing, they have rent they're paying, they have consultants they're paying, and they just need to know when will they get a chance to build their power plant, or through which system. And ideally, you want to kind of give them an assurance that there won't be a lot of tinkering of the process of getting to construction in the period within which they're developing. Especially, I think on the private sector side, due to all the kind of ambiguous nature of where we're going as a sector, they experience a lot of delays. So you could find that a project that typically in a proper market, I'd say would take 3 to 4 years from ideation to start of construction, then it takes 8 years or more. And it's because largely we have not been kind of forthright in just making certain decisions. So there's a signaling challenge that we have. Of course, it's appreciated that there are many things that go into making this decision, but at least we must, in my view, start to show that this is the direction we are going, make decisions, and those decisions might cause a bit of blood, or there'll be people who will suffer because of the status of their development. But if it's for the greater good of the sector that we decide, let's say, we're stopping feed-in tariff at this point, and now from here we are going to auctions, and everybody now knows this is the direction. It's way clearer. No one will really have a huge issue around that if they kind of can plan. You allow them to plan. I think same could also be said about the way we look at the structure of the sector. I know we designated KETRAC as the system operator. Then is it affected? How fast are we going to do it? If we are going to switch into an auction or a wholesale market, how will we balance all these things? I think there's just a feeling of lack of an understanding as to where we are going. I think also it's the essence of this conversation that we are having today. For me, those broadly, from a broad perspective, looking at it from the private sector angle, these are the challenges I would identify.
Thanks, George. And you've raised a few, several issues there that we need to discuss. But I'm not hearing from you, while all of you panelists are commenting about what we've done, what the challenges are. I'm not getting exactly what can we do better. Of course, in the signaling and the project development cycle, yes, the average duration in Kenya is probably 10 years for a project from start to commission, whereas the global standard is probably 3 to 5. So that's clear. If we could do better, but that has to do with the planning and the approvals. How about and of course you've highlighted the indecision sort of. Are there any other things in your opinion, Dr. and Adrian, that we could do better? I mean, some suggestions, because then that will lead us to where we go from here. Or maybe, Penina, we should get a few inputs from the listeners and then, wrap up towards that. What do you think? We'd like to have it as interactive as possible.
Yes, Bernard. But we can have the panelists react first as the questions are coming in.
Thank you, Bernard. Let me react. I think
Yes.
George has raised some issues which requires maybe some reaction from me as the public servant here and also the regulator. The first one is about signaling and giving directions. I think when we had the feed-in tariffs, I think it was very clear. Then we also had the list. We have actually currently the list cost part development plan, where we call it list cost is that we check at the candidate projects and they are proposed per unit cost at which they will come. Then we now allocate them timelines to when they can now come, because we're also doing, I don't know whether it's George who mentioned it or Adrian. I think Adrian mentioned it about the demand and supply. Which one comes first? And I think it is very important because according to our list cost power development plan, we have been trying to be very much accurate so that we don't bring what's called standard power, where we have got so much power generation and is waiting for demand. Because when a power plant comes in, the investor, also because they are private sector and they have put their investment, they want to start seeing cash flows immediately. So that will now, that cash flow must be reflected in the consumer tariffs. And that's why you see when you're doing our tariffs, we do them a tariff control period of 3 years. We factor in the power plants as per when we know they'll come in, and they must be paid for through the tariff. So that maybe has been, we have been spot on, but I know what George was alluding to, which I also want to be very honest about, is our transition from the feed-in tariffs to the auction. First, we did a study because as a country, we wanted to be informed by some statistics and some data so that we made right decisions. So the power auction study was done, and the study is very informative. Maybe most of you have read it, and those people who have not read it, you can get it from our website at EPRA. And that study pointed us towards how we should go to do the auction. What we have been working on is now the framework, the methodology of doing the auction. And sometimes balancing interests of private sector who are driven by, they want to come in very fast, the way George is putting, they want to come in and start doing the investments. And also governments, where we are balancing also a lot of interests, like the consumer interests. We are balancing the policy issues. We have been slow on this, and I must honestly accept this. But now I think we have reached at the tail end of it, where we are going to move. Even the structure of the sector, I think it was mentioned, we have been a single buyer model for a long time. But now we have come up with the draft regulations for the electricity market, open access, and bulk supply. And this is with an intention that we now move to a different structure. I had mentioned earlier on, we want to go to be part of the Eastern African Power Pool. We can't do this before we purchase our own electricity market internally. So it has taken some time, I agree, but now we are taking off. Our plane has been tested, everything, the engine seems to be running well, so allow us to take off. Thank you.
Okay, engineer, thanks for that. But just to take what you've said further, there are certain concerns about, you mentioned very well about the transmission lines that we are doing. And you're clear that they are designed for 400, but running at 200 kV. What are the implications on that on the tariff? Because right now people are complaining about tariff, and we've had conversation. The IPPs have been blamed for the high tariff, which, as you know, as a regulator, is not true, because the average IPP tariff, bulk tariff, is less than 10 shillings. The retail tariff we are looking at now is between 29 and 18. There are taxes, there are transmission costs, retail costs, and all that. Now, with the expansion of the grid, which is necessary, the way we are managing it, are we likely to see higher tariffs in the short term? You remember, KETRACO is doing PPPs with transmission companies. What should we expect? And then I also have a set of questions coming from the people. But the other thing is allocation of responsibilities, which we can discuss in another session. The alignment of the roles of REREC, the roles of KETRACO, and all that, because it's controversy like who is the national system operator? Are they the best place to do it, or are we doing it? There are certain issues that are not clear that will then affect the cost of service and even the quality. How do you address that?
Thank you so much, Bernard, for raising those very important issues. I'll start with the first one you raised first. The transmission lines which we built at 400 kV, and we're operating them at 220. And doing the capacities, like I think I'm sure the line between us and Ethiopia, the 500 kV HVDC, is designed for 2,000 megawatts, but currently we are only loading it with 200 megawatts. This was because, and the other ask which one should come before. If you do a small transmission line, a small capacity transmission line, and you want to operate it later on, it will be very expensive. And that's why you see some of these transmission lines, most of them actually, not some, were done by KETRACO. KETRACO, you don't now give them the investment cost, because these are government grants and loans, and also money from the exchequer. So I want maybe our viewers and our listeners to get it very clearly. KETRACO currently, in the tariff, we only give them maintenance costs. A new transmission line has got very minimal costs. But those transmission line now, the way I talked about, we want to go to a power market where in Tanzania, like when we are doing our line to Ethiopia, Tanzania, they expressed interest that time. They're not build this, their big hydropower plant, we the commission just the other day. They expressed interest to wheel some power through that line. So, and the way I mentioned, we are doing that because upgrading a line later on will lead to more costs. So in the transmission line development, we try to project long term, and then we try to see how to caution the consumer so that they don't take the full cost of it. And that's why government brought in KETRACO. KETRACO is purely owned by government. And Bernard mentioned something which I also want to react to. KETRACO now is trying to bring in private sector to inject money into transmission lines. But we also want to do them for long-term. Long-term investment, like now 30 years, that means the recovery costs will not be affect the tariff much. That is our strategy for it. We are going that way because, government now, we are constrained with government funding. Just the same way when we brought in the IPPs. Before the IPPs came in, all the generation plans were being done by government and our development partner funding. But we found this could not sustain us. So we are now doing pilots to see private sector coming in to do transmission lines, but we are really being keen on those contracts. First, they must be long-term, and the loans must be concessional grants for them. The people can now come with some cheap kind of financing so that the interest on those loans, or the interest on investment are not high. Yeah, thank you. I hope I've answered all the questions. Okay, no, one thing I want to answer. KETRACO designation as a system operator. This is a path where I must say, currently the system operation function is being done by Kenya Power. Kenya Power is not the best to do it because Kenya Power is involved in sales. And Kenya Power has got all the PPAs with the generators, both Kenyan and IPPs. I think it is good to have somebody independent to do the system operation function. We are on a transition. We are not going to have an independent system operator. What we call in the jargon terms, ISO. In Kenya, we designate KETRACO as a system operator. KETRACO will own both transmission networks and then do the system operation. That means dispatching. That means matching the load and the load, which is the demand and the supply, the generation. So why did we choose on KETRACO? I think even India, where we went to benchmark and we have benchmarked, India also currently now they have reached where they have gone to an independent system operator. But before they reached there, the biggest owner of the transmission network was doing the system operation. So some of the decisions we make, we do benchmarking, we use a lot of data and information to guide us. Why we have taken long is just because the control center currently is owned by Kenya Power and Lighting. People know it, the National Control Center, the one in Juja, Dandora, next to Juja substation, but it's Dandora. When I say Juja, some people may think it is in Juja town. No, it is Dandora. But that substation there is called Juja substation, yeah. So that network, that infrastructure is being owned by Kenya Power and Lighting. KETRACO got grants to build their own control center, which is taking long. But government made a bold step. We want to also even transfer the transmission assets, which are currently being owned by Kenya Power because of historical ownership, to KETRACO, and that's been done. So that now that smooth transfer is done, and then the function also moves. So we don't want also in the transmission segment, we want Kenya Power and Lighting to concentrate on distribution and supply, so that we want them to work on the reliability on the distribution and supply, which is our major problem at the moment. Thank you.
Okay, before I go to comments from the listeners, George or Adrian, do you have any other reactions based on what Dr. has said?
Maybe just one more. I think we also need to do a lot of work, and I've seen Kenya Power has already started doing the work on reducing the losses. I think this is probably one of the things that we could attack as a sector in the short term, and probably pass the benefit of that reduction to the customer as some kind of a discount. This is I think really important. I know the regulator, even in the last tariff review, they set some sort of a loss reduction trajectory for Kenya Power. I think we need to focus a bit more on that and pass the benefit as a reduced tariff. I just wanted to mention that also as one of the challenges.
Adrian, before I go to the wall.
Thank you, Bernard. Thank you, Dr. Okech, and for the input. I mean, for us, I think just to echo, first of all, I think the government strategy of investing in transmission lines is very welcome, and we see that building these core transmission lines around the country, and then also ultimately doing the interconnection to the Eastern African power pool and then to the Southern African power pool later is very good for us. And we think that moving forward with better collaboration, and as we work to finalize now the system rules and the new policies, I think that's a good step for us moving forward. Thank you, Bernard.
Thank you. Dr. Okech, the panelists, I have some questions. The first one is to Dr. Okech. In your opinion, Daktari, on what's your opinion on green hydrogen's role in the Kenyan electricity sector, particularly for generation in the form of green hydrogen-based storage?
Thank you so much. I've seen a question on green hydrogen. I see a question on battery storage. I want to pick this one together at once.
Mm-hmm.
I think green hydrogen will be very good for our system because for those maybe who may not know, I mentioned that our peak supply, our peak demand occurs between 7 o'clock and 10 o'clock in the evening. And Bernard mentioned earlier on, like now our highest peak we have had is 2239 megawatts.
239.
Then after that, the load goes down to as low as sometimes 1000 megawatts. What happens during this time? We shut down most of those power plants. And in a geothermal power plant, because it's a steam turbine, shutting it down takes long. And what we do, we vent steam. That steam is just energy we are throwing to the air. So green hydrogen is something which we can really use to harvest that energy we are throwing to the air, so that we use it as storage, so that we bring it now at a time later on when we need it. Likewise to battery storage system. Like when I'm venting steam between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. in the morning, or maybe when now all the geothermals have been maybe reduced to the bare minimum, we can be using that to do battery storage. Battery storage will also come in a way to provide ancillary services. That means system support. Because now I think our system, the way we have been running it, with so much of the variable renewables, and I'm talking about the wind and solar, which are now intermittent, we need more of the ancillary services. That means system support to support the balance between generation and supply. Because see, right now the supply itself is varying. Then you need a very fast picking up plants like hydro, and also the battery storage system will help us there. So that's something we have done. And there's something also which George mentioned, and I will want to talk about it. And since it's also on the wall here, somebody has also talked about Ketraco not being the best as a system operator. But maybe this I mentioned earlier. You see, we don't want to create more bodies because, like in April, for those people who aren't aware, we get our levies because we are supported by levies. We are not supported by direct transfer from the exchequer. And you have got what's called electricity levy. If you check at your bill, you will see some levy which comes to April to support our operations. We also get a levy from petroleum to support our operation. Assuming we are another independent body, which we don't want them to rely on, because relying on government funding has been one of the challenges we don't want to go, because I've seen it affecting the operations of GDC, affecting the operations like of Ketraco as well at some time. So we didn't want to bring another body to be relying on exchequer. But if I was to bring an independent operator, independent system operator, we'll bring it at a point when the market has matured, so that the tradings in the market will take care of the independent system operator. So KETRACO, we are now, is called system operator, not independent system operator. On transition, we know they own the networks, but now I don't think there are a lot of conflict because those lines, we don't have redundancies in Kenya. So there's no way that we are saying KETRACO will be using more of their lines and not using other lines. So I don't think that one there's no conflict for KETRACO for the time being. But as now we are bringing more players even in the transmission network, and also the market matures, will go to independent system operation. Thank you. I think the rest can react as I will.
Dr. while I have you there, there's this question about the clarity of the requirement for battery storage for VRE projects. Is it going to be a requirement? I mean, like now solar plants, do they have to have storage to smoothen that, or wind plant? Is it a requirement that's coming? There's lack of clarity, but there's been some talk about that.
Thank you. I can mention, okay, it's not only battery storage, we can help us to mitigate that kind of intermittency. You know of the STATCOMs we have in the system, like Electrocana STATCOMs. I think, and even us as a regulator, we have done some studies. We have identified some points where even we can use in the network itself to put STATCOM like Rabai substation. At Lesos, we also have reactors. Because what happens is that when there's a variation, like there are two things we balance in our interconnected system. That is the load and the demand. That is balanced by frequency balancing. Then now we also talk about reactive power demand, which we do now by either injecting reactive power or absorbing the reactive power from the system to control the voltages. So those are one of the things we do. But I think it will be a requirement that we want to mitigate so much of this intermittency by the variable renewables. So I think we'll check at which is the most optimal way, whether they come with the STATCOMs or they come with some battery storage just to smoothen the operation so that they don't affect the system negatively. Currently, I can mention without fear of contradiction, Kenyan, using our legacy hydropower plant, have been absorbing all this at almost no compensation because we don't compensate them. But this is also, we have done a study. The way I said, we like making some decisions from informed point of view. We have done an ancillary services study for Kenyan system. It's available also on our website. I know the people in the sector like yourself, you have it, but our viewers can also have a look at it. It has a lot of recommendations which we are looking into. Thank you.
Okay, and there is one more question from Guya, which any of the panelists can answer. What is Ethiopia doing that Kenya isn't doing to make our electricity cheaper, especially now that we have wind and geothermal? George?
It's a very interesting question because I think from my point of view, you must contextualize the cost of power in Ethiopia versus the cost of power in Kenya. Actually considering how the two markets are run. They are not run in completely the same way. There's a lot of direct and indirect subsidies in the cost of power in Ethiopia. They have the advantage of also building bigger, mostly hydropower dams, which again, they benefit from economies of scale because of that. While us, we have a system that is diversified with different kind of generation technologies, and to a large extent, our tariff is very much cost reflective. That is jargon to say that whatever costs we incur to deliver the kilowatt hour to the consumer is probably passed on to the bill of the consumer. But this is not really the case for the power from Ethiopia. Yes, they are blessed with big capacity hydropower plants, which really helps. I mean, if you think of a 300 megawatt hydro dam versus a 6 gigawatt one, there's some economies of scale there where you will end up with a lower per unit cost of power just because it's bigger. And of course, as I think the Guya mentions, wind and geothermal, again, the cost of generating from these technologies will not be the same as a big hydro dam. We have smaller power plants in Kenya. If we could do, if it's possible to do bigger power plants, then we'll benefit a bit more from the economies of scale. But I think the premise of the question, and again, I will allow also the other panelists to chime in. The premise of the question is not quite right, because the way they price their power in Ethiopia is not the same way we price it in Kenya. And that aspect of passing the full cost of producing a unit is not kind of respected, or for their reasons, the Ethiopian government is able to, or decided to, subsidize the cost. Just let me dwell on this a bit, because then I think 2 years ago there was an effort by the Ethiopians to increase the cost of power. Generally, whatever they were selling power at was not kind of viable commercially. So they were then trying to sensitize the public and increase the cost of power slowly. So there's an effort there also to correct it, to bring it back to cost reflectivity. Again, extending this argument to the region, the same happened in Zimbabwe. So Zimbabwe, they had a really low cost of power generating from the hydro dams, again, Kariba Dam, not really reflective of the cost of generating. And then now they realize that it's not sustainable to continue in this way. And you start to slowly increase the cost just to make sure that there's no civil unrest by a huge increase. But you see that some of these markets that we compare Kenya to, they are not really selling power at the cost that they incur to produce it. And again, this is a similar story in Egypt. If you check on the internet, you'll see again Egypt, I think from 3 years back, they've done 2 rounds where they've tried to correct the cost of power by passing more of the real costs into the final tariff that the consumer gets. It's a delicate balance. I'm not the best place to comment, not being the regulator. I think the regulator would give a better comment, but that is my view on this matter. We must judge the cost that we have in Kenya, considering how our market operates and how those other markets operate.
Okay, thank you, George. And just to reinforce, the regulator will confirm that Tanzania also had an increment plan that's facing some pushback, and so is South Africa. They had a graduated plan to increase, and there's been a lot of pushback. So maybe what I'll ask the regulators is just to give perspective to address the notion that Kenyan power is expensive. Dr.
Thank you, Bernard, and thank you, George. You have really done well. I think you should come and join me as a regulator. I think you've made my work easier. May I appreciate the people who asked questions on this wall. I'm seeing a channel. I think your question I've addressed it about the green hydrogen. Green hydrogen can also be used for fertilizer production. So I think we are trying to look at it also as on the load side, where it can come in, so that we also create industrialization through green hydrogen. We are targeting mostly the Olkaria complex, where there are a lot of geothermal power, the one I talked about. I also want to appreciate Paul Olela, who asked me about the BESS and the variable renewables projects. I hope I will address your question fully. Then there is also Engineer Julius about the independent system operator, which I think I've addressed also fully. Let's come to now what Bernard asked me about the cost of supply. I think people have been comparing us very wrongly. As Kenya, actually, we decided to have what's called cost-reflective tariffs. How do you achieve that cost-reflective tariffs? We check at what's called the revenue requirements. How much money do you require to buy power from all the generators in this country? The one now which we require in the system. And that's why we bring the IPPs. They come with the per unit cost. Then we check at the cost of how much will it take to transmit that power from the generator until it reaches all the consumers in Kenya. Then now we look at the retailing cost and all that. So all these costs, we put them together and call them the sector revenue requirements. And we use it now to come with the tariff for each consumer category. Ours has been purely reflective. We remove subsidies. And that's why I'm thanking George, because George talked about it. I think Ethiopia Ethiopia did it the other day. Egypt and people are almost going on strike. Nigeria has tried it. South Africa has tried it, and even our neighbor Tanzania. And more so like Ethiopia and Tanzania, we are with them in a situation where we share knowledge. They have been benchmarking with us. Our consumers are paying the right cost of electricity, and as what we do as a regulator, we really make sure that only prudent costs goes in that revenue requirements. And before we announce a tariff, we really do a lot of studies, a lot of research, a lot of best practice, how we bring them into the tariff. And actually, George mentioned something which now let me react to it about the losses. We did a study before we announced ourselves on the tariff we did in 2013. That time, the losses in Kenya Power Lighting was standing at 24%. Losses also, there are losses which must be incurred, which called technical losses, more so due to the current flowing in the wires. I know that is the I squared R for engineers who are there. Those ones, they are inherent in a system. You cannot eliminate them totally. So in our study, which we did on the losses before we did the tariff, we found that Kenya Power should have been having a system loss, total losses of around close to 14%. But because we knew some of these things were because of the weakness in the system, which we knew there are some projects they are doing, we do not allow them to pass all that 24%. We only allow them, like currently, actually, the allowed loss for them is 18.5%. So when they go beyond that percentage loss, they are now eating into their profit. Although that also have a problem with them, because now when it eats into their profit, then now they also give poor service. So as a regulator, we are trying to balance so many things. So we'll see how to deal with the losses. First of all, Kenyans must also be educated. Electricity theft means somebody pays for it. So when maybe you see a neighbor getting power for free, please don't keep quiet, because that power will now come to a loss in this system, and then that loss will be paid by everybody else, isn't it? So don't assist your neighbor by paying for him his power. By him not paying, then now you pay through the losses. This is very rampant. There are a lot of unconnected, unmetered supplies. There's meter tampering, direct illegal connections. And that's what now we are putting our foot as a regulator for Kenya Power to work hard on those ones. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Engineer. I think we haven't done a lot of justice to consumers. We've talked a lot about the system and the generators and the transmission. And I have a question on the wall from Daisy Owiti. Why is the rural electrification still elusive for majority of Kenyans? What are the plans to make it affordable? And that speaks to the fact that I was saying, as much as we are saying we have 77% plus access, what is the real state of connectivity? And that question therefore applies. George, Engineer Adrian, who's going to address that? Why is rural electrification still elusive for majority of Kenyans?
Maybe let me start, then the rest can go, because I worked there one time. So maybe let me start. Rural electrification, actually, how have we done it? Initially, we are using government funding. I remember when I was in rural electrification I joined rural electrification in 2008. And I was among the management team who rolled the first rural electrification master plan, major one, where we had made an impact. And we did projects in all the 290 constituencies then. And these are projects in all those, because we used to get money from the exchequer, and we used to use the same allocation method by the CDF to allocate now money per constituency, meaning we are doing projects in all constituencies. But like now, the kind of strain we have had on government budgets, allocation to rural electrification has been going down. Then also initially we still have a lot of support, like from the French development, AFD. We have got a lot of development partners who are supporting. And this one are now actually, we have also found that we cannot continue relying on exchequer funding and development partner funds and grants or loans, some of them which come, and we are talking about the loan burden. Currently, we are working on a pilot where we want to roll out one private sector. And I talked about the COSAP, Kenya Off-Grid Access Project, which is targeting the 19 underserved counties. That means where the grid has not arrived. So we have identified sites. We have now allocated the private sector who have expressed expression of interest to develop these sites for mini grids. The only challenge which I know, and if there's somebody here on the mini grid, they'll tell me why are they paying more higher than those who are in the grid. That is something which we are still working on as a regulator and also from policy from the government. The other mini grids, which are developed by REREC and operated by Kenya Power, when you're doing the tariff for the grid connected customers, we do what's called a cross subsidy because they're also all Kenyan. So that means we give them the same tariff, then we all pay the same. So that means they should have been paying more, but all of us are both the same level. There's been a bit of a misunderstanding where these privately owned mini grids, people have been feeling that the public government should not give money to private sector. But to me, my stand, and that's what we are pushing as the people who are trying to influence the policy, we are not subsidizing the private sector, we are subsidizing the consumers. And this is what we have, we have met with the Energy Committee of Parliament, we have explained, and I think this one very soon, by the time we unlock it, the mini grid space will grow very fast because private sector will come in with their money, but we give them now the rate of return, which is good for them to put their money there, while the consumers will not realize this tariff which they are complaining about. We'll bring that at the same level through that cross subsidy. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Dr. Okech. I'll just make a comment that does not need your feedback, but from the Kenya Power annual report, we estimate that the rural electrification levy for 2022 was about 8.53 billion, and for 2023 was 11.5 billion. So the ministry probably handles that, but I think that would also go a long way in addressing some of these things when you talk about constraints in budgets, because the intention of the Rural Electrification Fund is to enhance access. So it is not a question for you, but let's just note that there's monies that are being collected for that purpose, and we need to hold the system to account. When we talk about 2.5 billion given for rural electrification, when we know that the collections are 11.58 billion, we should ask more, but that's not for this session. I see Abubakar Ali made, I think it's a comment about capital costs and the fiscal policies in the country. But I think at the end of the day, what affects credit pricing and investor appetite is the larger macroeconomic environment where the Ministry of Energy itself has very little control or influence, and it depends on actually the national economy. So as much as, yes, the country risk is an issue in the pricing of capital for development of projects, which eventually contributes to the tariffs, it is beyond the Ministry of Energy, it's beyond EPRA, it's beyond the energy sector. This should be a national debate. How do we, and it cuts across all investments, whether agriculture, energy, infrastructure, and all that. I think we've done justice to most of the questions that have been asked. And one of the question leads me to the next session that I'm going to have with the panelists. There was the question to Dr. Okech, with your great experience in the sector, what does the future of the sector in Kenya look like 10 years from now? And that brings us to the next session that we had in mind regarding opinions from the panelists. How do we get from here? How do you see the sector evolving, or how would you like the sector to evolve? So we'll start with you, Dr. Okech, based on that question.
Thank you. I think that is a very good question, and thank you for the whoever has raised it, and Bernard for also
that is from Andrew Adwera of ESSAC.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. And I think that is good. First of all, as a regulator, I mentioned the problems you have with the, like now, mini grids, where we want to bring in the private sector. And I said that mini grid to me will play a very key role if you are to achieve the 100% connectivity or access rate by 2030. What we have done as a regulator, we have done now the mini grid regulations, 2024. They are the tail end of being, we have recommended it to our cabinet secretary just to, then they go to Attorney General, then now they are gazetted. This regulation to me will be a game changer because what I was talking about, those issues where we address the issues like now when a mini grid is developed by a private sector, what confidence that the private sector has that when the grid arrives, how will this investment be treated? We are now put this in regulations. That cross-subsidy I was talking about, where people are feeling that we are cross-subsidizing the private sector, we are really cross-subsidizing now the consumers because the consumers are the ones who need support. This one I think will come clearly, and that will be, to me, will make us achieve the universal electrification by 2030. Another thing that we are doing is that I think one thing I also want to mention, we are doing a lot of regulations to streamline the sector. We also revised some of the old regulation, like when we did some of them, we did with my colleague Bernard. He was here, he was my colleague. Like now the solar PV regulations, which to me was a game changer because initially we used to find that the solar components, the failure rates were high because some people are dumping old technologies. Nobody was trying to check the quality of the material coming into this country. We have now revised the solar PV regulation. We have got now the draft ones, which should coming in for solar PV 2024 regulations. And we are streamlining so that the components and even the solar PV, even the technicians, because we want licensed technicians who can do good work, so that if you are doing a solar on top of your roof, we are sure you have got enough competent people who will do a good work for you and you get a good service from me for it. And we are doing so many regulations. I don't want to mention all of them. I just mentioned those two because those two to me will be good. But let me mention one, net metering. I think somebody mentioned it here. That is why we also want to tap in, because net metering will allow people who have put solar rooftops in their houses to bank that power into the grid. This regulation has been gazetted. Now this is effective. So today, our listeners, our viewers, if you've got a solar rooftop in your house, what you need to have, you need to have what's called a bidirectional meter, which can measure the power going in and coming out. Then you make a petition of Kenya Power Lighting. Then if maybe during the daytime you are not in your house, you are in the office and your solar is generating power, you can put it to the grid and then get it when you go home. This to me will really be a game changer for us, and these are the good things I'm foreseeing for the sector. The other one is, now I talked about the power markets and the regional market. And another one called open access. Open access, maybe just allow me to explain it briefly, is where maybe a generator or a big consumer like Bamburi, let me just, for example, can now enter into a contract with the Kenyan or carrier so that they get power directly from Kenyan, and then they wheel it through the network, and then it dumped to them where they want to use it. This to me is the way to go, because we want to also have a free market where it's not so much control and it's not so much restricted. Then later on we mature to what's called a spot market, where now the dispatcher system will just be the day before, people declare how much the power they have to sell and at what cost. Then we'll be matching now the buyers and the sellers, and we'll be like the stock exchange, but this will now be for power. So to me, I'm very much optimistic. We are in the right path, but some people feel we have been working so slowly, but some of them needed some things to mature for us to reach where we have reached. Thank you, Ben. I hope I've addressed all the questions, but if there's anything which I have not addressed or any concern, I'll come back later. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Adrian, where do we go from here? How do you like to see the sector evolve?
Thank you. I think for my side, I think I'm seeing the sector evolving, and Dr. has explained it very well from the generation and the market becoming more liberalized, open, and more competitive. And I think as we move forward, we are seeing that the sector should be able to now improve infrastructure, and then we can see some innovation, kind of innovative structures of building projects, whereby if you're looking for transmission lines. You can bundle some of the transmission line projects together with some generation projects, and moving forward, some of these issues to do, like even with rural electrification. We have most of the renewable energy projects in Kenya are located in rural areas. Some of these projects could even be used to assist with electrification within the surrounding rural areas. And I'm saying as coming with a robust energy system in future. But between now and then, I think we do have quite a bit of work to do. I think we have the potential and we are able to do it. And I think in the short term, if we continue bringing in cheaper generation, if we work with the regulator just on the policy, just to give all our ideas on the policy, if we have better collaboration between all industry participants and discuss this on a regular basis. And I think most of all, sometimes we forget to tap ourselves on the back. The issue of innovation. As Kenyans, we have had quite some good innovative ideas. The M-Pesa and some of these ideas have gone global. For us, like for ourselves, we are able to pay over 2,000 landowners in our Meru project using M-Pesa. And these are some of the things that have enabled the project to be viable. So I think within ourselves, as we sit and have this discussion and brainstorming, I think we can really transform and drive our electricity energy system forward.
Thank you, Adrian. George, where do we go from here?
Yeah, thanks,
How do you
Bernard.
see the sector evolving?
Yeah, so first, before I address that, I think there's one thing that I feel like I must mention. I think on the generation side, we must take back the planning to the regulator. I know this, I've not been paid by the regulator to say this, but I think it's good conduct to have the overseer of the planning do the planning. It was probably a mistake, a structural mistake we have done in the past. And then in terms of where we're going forward.
George, please put that in the context of INEP as well, because INEP is supposed to be based at the ministry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yes, the ministry is the policy maker, and I think just below the ministry is the regulator, who then oversees all of us who are licensees. And I think between the ministry and the regulator, matters of INEP, which is now the Integrated National Energy Plan, that not only looks at electricity, but all the other forms of energy and actually energy resources and energy uses. So it even has county energy plans built into it. And now this is an attempt. Now within the 2019 Energy Act, there was an attempt to look at energy wholesale. I think we've always been saying that about 60 to 70% of the energy we use is bioenergy. So we firewood and charcoal. And then we've always put a lot of emphasis on electricity, like through the least cost power development plan. But then in the 2019 Act, we now came up with this framework, the Integrated National Energy Plan, that we will now take into account all the other forms of energy. And then we plan based on that. And again, in my view, the best place to have this seated is within, of course, the policymaker. And the policymaker doesn't act on its own. It then acts through the regulator, who now is able to understand all sides, all the licensees and the consumers. And I think as Dr. Okech was saying, they then do this balance where they ensure that everyone is being treated fairly by the system. And in my view, again, now this is the proper positioning where planning should be happening. Let all of us who are licensees then focus on whether we are for profit or we are meant to maybe extend transmission lines and we're a state agency or whatever else we are licensed to do, we just focus on that. I think structurally that is something I would want us to kind of reverse and go back to that. Where do I want us to go? I have two ways of looking at it. One is ensuring the consumer has the maximum choice possible. And I mean that the consumer can buy power from whatever sources that they would want. Of course, it's a kind of an idealistic scenario, but I would want the consumer to be able to access power from the power pool, from the CNI market, from the utility, and even install their own. Now, for this to happen, of course, we have to balance that we are not hurting any of the licensees in the process of opening up these possibilities for the consumers. But I think it's something that we have to work towards. We have to start making those steps. And I think, again, the regulators talked about all the different regulations, open access, net metering, even mini grid regulations, all that really is moving us towards that direction. And then the second one is on competition. I think we've done well on the generation side. We have, as Dr. said, 40% of the energy is from IPPs, 60% from KenGen. We need to do a lot more to just make sure that things are clear. Someone walking into this country, or even someone who lives in this country and wants to go into electricity, and maybe now they're in real estate, they know this is the process. They know if I put money here, I will be able to access competitively the chance to build the next power plant. Same story also for transmission. I think we must now develop a competitive process of procuring private transmission lines. I think this is something that will be really beneficial to allow the private sector to direct funding. I know a lot of even ESAC members are really interested to go into transmission, but then we must also make the process look very above board and competitive. I think that's the way we also achieve the pricing point. Then on distribution,
George, just to reinforce that, there's a question on the wall from Eddie to Engineer Okech, but you've addressed part of it. Is the procurement of the ITPs should be very transparent, and I think that plays to the fact that recently there was an article about Africa 50 and the Adani Group doing power, PIP power transmission projects. Now, with the Adani saga at the airport, we don't know what now the consumers are going to say, because at the end of the day, whether properly procured or not, if there is a jump in the cost of power, it's going to come back to that. Fortunately, this has gone through the process without any protests, but we don't know given what's happening with the airport. So that's just food for thought. And
maybe just to comment on that, Bernard, I think let's not look at it from the preventing consumer reaction, but increasing or allowing for competition. As I said, there's many people, many companies with funding willing to go into transmission, but they just don't have a very clear process. I know there's the PPP Act, there's the PIP, privately initiated projects, but what I foresee, what I envision is some sort of competitive tendering process for transmission, for generation. And I was just to finish finish off my comments on the distribution side. I think let's also give space for CNI to continue to grow. The CNI market has really, I would say, grown now. It's I don't know if it's 450 megawatt or slightly more actually now. And then there's this idea of creating like a regional distributors, whether it's a part of KPLC or it's a concession that KPLC puts out to someone else, and now they are able to distribute power locally, and I think better able also to manage all the power theft that is happening locally. So if we then allow the private sector all these avenues to invest, I think we'll be able to absorb a lot more of the funding that is available for the country. Kenya is actually really well regarded by investors, and we just need to show them these are the avenues where you can put your money, and it's a competitive process, it's clear. That's my comment. That's where I see us going.
Okay, thank you for that. And I'd like to take your comment further on the concessioning, we saw in Uganda that Umeme actually improved the efficiency of power distribution and retail in Uganda when they took part of the concessions from UETCL. So it's something. But that doesn't mean we are not looking at it here, because I think there is a project where KPLC is trying to develop a super ESCO. The approach would be fine, but I think they can accelerate it by doing the concessioning and letting the concessionaires, who should be private sector, manage with targets efficiently, the distribution, the losses and all that. So probably that's a discussion we can have with the regulator and the sector as a whole. The super ESCO might not have been the best approach, but can we improve it before it's fully implemented? We know it's been granted funding by FDB, but can we do it better so that we leapfrog to a much more or to a more efficient system? One last question before I come to you for your last words. I see we are in the last 10 minutes. Unless there are more questions from the listeners, is Obiero is asking, did the cost of funding electricity access negatively impact Kenya Power balance sheet? How can this be alleviated in future? And Dr. Okech, you had mentioned a bit of it, the last mile program that was done, and we had questioned this as KEPSA in the olden days, that who is paying that bill? And then later, the PS then said, no, that's a fully funded government project. But it turned out that Kenya Power was left carrying the ball. How can we alleviate this in future? Dr. will appreciate your comment on that.
Thank you, Bernard. I lost the network a bit, but I'm back. Let me comment first of all on the IPPs coming into the transmission segment. I think it was raised on the wall, I think by Eddie, or I think Eddie Obiero. To me, even how the IPPs came in during the feed-in tariff, we started by them expressing interest. They actually private sector initiated kind of drives. We're not going to, we are not a partial even a power auction for the IPPs as we talk today. So, and I'm commenting this in line to the question, the comment and the question which came from the wall. I just lost my network. I don't know, I cannot know who commented on it. And Bernard has mentioned it also. The Adani case and the Africa at 50. I think these are now private sector who saw the kind of investment plans Ketraco had, and then the Ketraco funding and the funding gaps. And because they have got experience in doing transmission line in their other jurisdictions, they express interest. They are the same way the first IPPs were expressing interest. So I think whoever was feeling that, okay, maybe I don't want to talk much about it as if the project is so clean, because I cannot give it a clean bill of health myself. But as a regulator, what we're trying to see is the investment, at what cost is it coming, and then I talked about the cost recovery. And how the project came in, I told you it is and our amount was very clear. It was an expression of interest from a private investor, just the same way the first IPPs came. So I think somebody should not read anything maybe sinister, because we have done that before. What will assure you as a regulator that before that can come into the tariff, it will be, we'll scrutinize all the contracts and the cost of investments. And also, I think what you have advised also even before it comes to us is the investment should be from cheaper sources of financing, so that we don't have very high interest rates, which will affect the. About the Kenya Power lighting at the last mile, what did he ask went in before the last mile? Initially, remember, rural electricity projects were being done by Kenya Power lighting. And this could actually, this affected their revenue, rightfully, even for the last mile. I think there's some money the government still owes Kenya Power. And that's why our standards has been very clear. Let Kenya Power operate profitably the way they should, because when we give them the tariff, we are checking at their profit margins. We don't want them to make abnormal profits, but we want them also to make profits for the shareholders, because Kenya Power Lighting is not 100% government owned. So when they make losses, I think that's also giving a wrong signal. And also, when they make losses, that affect the supply and the service they give to you, because when they make losses, they will not serve you better. So we are very interested in how Kenya Power performs. One thing George mentioned, which I know is going to affect Kenya Power Lighting, and we have warned them as much, is the C&I, the commercial industrial. You know, I was joking with the Kenya Power Lighting management with a meeting with them that, you see, these are your anchor customers installing the solar PV, which to me is a good thing for the market. And I know for George is smiling, and I know for Bernard, that's good for you. But what will happen if Bamboo was paying Kenya Power Lighting 24 million, let's say just for, say, or maybe 50 million, when they put that solar on the top of the roof, what will happen to the Kenya Power Lighting revenue? Is it not going to reach
150 million to be correct, actually?
Yeah, 150 million. So what will happen to the Kenya Power Lighting revenue when the C&I has put the, the solar, and then now they are reducing the Kenya Power Lighting revenue? So I told the MD, who's a good friend of mine, Dr. Ginesero, that please, these are your customers. When did you last visit your biggest customer and know what their plans, what their needs? I think Kenya Power needs to be proactive, because C&I is good, but when you lose your anchor customers, it may affect them. Otherwise, my closing remarks, Bernard, I must say that it has been very nice. Or I will wait a bit.
Okay, no, just go on. Just go on. We are coming to the last 10 minutes.
Yes, it has been very nice having this kind of discussion. The chat has been very informative. I want to appreciate the panelists, my fellow panelists, for being very much knowledgeable and also giving very correct information, at most updated information also in most cases. And also our listeners and viewers for the questions they have asked, which are also showing the interest they have in this sector. I think with the kind of plans which we have as a government, now I'm talking as a government public servant, and with the support we have from all the sector players, I think we have a long way to go. Something was mentioned about public participation, and I must say that all the regulations we do, we must involve public participation, because this is now entrenched in the Statutory Instruments Act of 2013, which requires public participation. Even this issue of us trying to change the market structure will subject to public participation. Even the issue of bringing in the IPPs into the transmission segment, I think this one will also undertake to take it to public participation. With those, I really appreciate. I've enjoyed discussing with you people, and thank you.
Thank you, Daktari. Thank you for all the contributions. Adrian, your last word or your last words?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, everyone. It's been good to, and I've enjoyed the session, learned a lot from my fellow panelists. I think for myself, as a Kenyan, we all aspire to get to be an industrialized middle-income country and eventually become a high-income country. And I think what we are doing here, this is one of the pieces to the puzzle. So we will be keen. We will continue working together. We'll need just to continue the interest. The work that we've done up to date has been commendable, and we will continue working together just for us to drive the sector forward in various aspects. So looking forward to more collaborations. Thank you to ESAC and the team for putting this together. And we are looking forward to more discussions and collaborations as we move forward. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Adrian. George, you have 1 minute.
Yeah, thank you, Bernard. Just quickly, I see a comment here. How does consumer get power direct from the pole? I hope they don't mean they're stealing power, because you're not supposed to get power directly from the pole. You're supposed to be metered, and this is probably more or less what we're talking about when you're talking about losses, power theft. So this is not something we are supposed to be doing. You need to work with Kenya Power to get metered, and then Kenya Power would then help you do the connection and meter you and bill you and ensure your quality of supply. Thanks everyone for joining us today. I think as ESAP, we are very grateful to have such a distinguished panel and also moderator Bernard. Thanks a lot for sharing your views. We really, as an association, try to push for a better sector for all of us, consumers and also investors. So yeah, for me, that's it. I think we are hopeful. We are moving in the right direction. Yeah, we might maybe be of the opinion that it's a bit slow, but we do acknowledge that we are going in the right direction. Asante sana, that's it for me, Bernard. Thank you.
Thank you, George. And from my part, on my part, I mean, the conversation has been good. I wish it could be longer, but one of the things that is emerging is government moves slowly but surely, but in the right direction, from what Engineer Okech has said, and from the speed we are seeing things moving at. With those many remarks, I'd like to hand you back to Penina for the closing, and we'll hopefully have some more engaging sessions together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bernard. Thank you, Engineer Okech, Adrian, and George. Great job. I'd also want to thank those who joined us for the questions. For those that we were not able to respond to, we will respond to them after this. No worries. But I am certain we've managed to cover the larger bit of what we've been asked. So before we leave, I want to leave us with a short analogy, and I want our panelists to respond to. You unmute. There'll be a part where you respond. And my analogy is a small illustration about. Okay, here it goes. So there's a group of people walking in one direction, and then there's a young man walking in the opposite direction. The young man suddenly dashes into a bush to do 1, 2, 3. What would you think is a likely reaction of this group of people walking in this other direction?
They'll take off.
They ignore.
No, they run away.
Yeah.
Adrian and
Continue
Bernard?
moving. They are the majority.
Yeah, they'll definitely be distracted a bit, but continue moving.
No, we fear
Okay.
Gen Zs. I personally I fear Gen Zs. I don't want them to visit me.
No, they will not. But in terms of reactions, do you think they're going to to want to know what the young man is doing?
No, I don't know. 1, 2, 3, I don't know.
So no, take the same scenario. There's a group of people walking one direction. Then there's a young man walking in the other direction, and then the young man decides to do the 1, 2, 3 just there in front of them. What is the likely reaction? Let me give you a hint. Looking away.
Okay.
We are going to take the lessons from that analogy in our next episode of the ESAC knowledge sharing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. God bless.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
You can stay in the studio. We are alone now.